Hi, welcome aboard. You know, I've been a Queenslander now for about 11 years. Now, I didn't move here for the reasons that most of the 2,000 people a month who cross Queensland's borders from the south move here. I moved here without knowing much about Queensland, but it was the only place in which I could start World of Boats and Leisure. And the benefits of living here for that reason came as an extremely pleasant surprise. Now, the rest of Australia tends to laugh at Queensland, and we're lampooned for the style of government and for our down-home attitudes and all that sort of thing. And that causes me to be a little bit puzzled. I mean, 2,000 people a month can't be wrong. And if the other states are better than Queensland, why don't people stay there? And of course, most of that criticism comes from the media. But the fact is that influx of people does happen, and it happens every month, and it's been going on for about 15 years. Now, the Barrier Reef and the Whitsundays and the magnificent climate and all of the other attractions have been here for a lot longer than that. But the influx started about 15 years ago and has been growing ever since. So I guess, as I said, I'm a little puzzled as to how people down south, particularly the media, can criticise the place so much and yet make this their preferred place to live, their preferred place to retire and that sort of thing. Now, politicking aside, that influx of people presents some serious problems for the Queensland government. Problems of growth of population, which is far greater than any other state. Problems of housing those people, and problems of providing them with the facilities to enjoy Queensland's climate and its attractions, and also without impacting the environment. Now, today's story is about the way in which the Queensland government and the Gold Coast City Council and the Albert Shire have addressed the problems of a growing population, the problems of wrong utilisation and over-utilisation of one of our most magnificent resources. Now, we hear protests on a regular basis from those who advocate zero population growth. We hear howls of protests from conservationists who believe that the environment's being destroyed and so on. And that's exacerbated further by the fact that Queensland is Australia's most popular tourist destination, so development goes ahead in that area too. Places such as Hamilton Island, Hayman Island come in for their share of criticism for their apparent environmental impact. The fact is that this type of destination serves at least two essential purposes. They attract people to the area, which of course has to happen, and they confine the people who come to the area in a controlled environment which serves to minimise the environmental impact of all those visitors. Rather than having tourists wandering at will all over the landscape and leaving their rubbish and trampling the vegetation, day trips to wilderness areas and the reef are conducted under controlled circumstances and everybody benefits. Now, generally, as we'll see during this show, when that sort of development takes place, it's balanced by the fact that the government generally dedicates adjacent areas as national parks or at least as nature reserves. Now, the Queensland National Parks and Wildlife Service, working with other government departments such as the Harbours and Marine Boating and Fisheries Patrol, and also representatives and patrol officers from various councils, particularly in the southeast corner of the state, represent an umbrella of protection over our precious national resources, and their vision of the future includes a strong sense of heritage and preservation of our natural wonders for the future. Now, their job isn't easy. In spite of the vocal minority, my experience is that the vast majority of people have little or no regard for the environment and treat it as a garbage dump. Visit any beach or picnic area on a Monday morning and you'll see empty beer cans, plastic bags and broken bottles half buried in the sand. I've already mentioned the terrible effects of floating plastic bags on turtles and other marine life, not to mention the cooked outboards as a result of bags wrapped around the water intakes. A recent Lions Club clean-up of a small area of South Stradbroke Island yielded several large truckloads of garbage of all kinds, and those clean-ups go on a regular basis. But getting back to my original point, the developers aren't necessarily the problem. They're required to conform to government regulations which are designed to control their activities and minimise their impact on the environment whilst catering for a steadily growing population. And the fact is, development must go on because of that growth in population. There's an area of development which particularly concerns us as boaties, in which Queensland leads the rest of Australia by miles. There can be no doubt that boating impacts the environment directly and constantly. Thousands of new boats hit the water each year and spread far and wide. I've said before that a boat is the easiest way for us to access and enjoy the wilderness, and that's where most of the boats head. The problem's twofold. The boats have to be housed and their impact on the wilderness has to be minimised or at least controlled. The growth of the industry can't be curbed. That'd be undemocratic and would deprive the public of an essential recreational resource. So the Queensland Government came up with a plan which accomplishes these goals in the best possible way. Firstly, they realised that boats on swing moorings were a problem. They have to be moored in deep water, and the only deep water around in Queensland is in the narrow navigation channels. At least that applies to the southeast corner. They therefore represent an eyesore and a hazard to navigation as well. Many boats are falling into disrepair due to difficulty of access. The development boom in Queensland offered the solution. We lead the country in marinas. Marinas here are generally different to those in southern states in that they cater not only to boats, but have shopping centres, residences and sometimes even resorts as part of the overall development. Most have engineering and maintenance facilities, chandlery stores, and they offer the boat owner a complete facility to cater to all of his needs. All this achieves a very important end. It centralises and confines the storage and maintenance of boats, it clears them from the channels, and it provides the owners with every possible facility, including waste and garbage disposal. Fuel and power and even provisions are there. As a result, the waterways in general have been largely cleared of moored boats, and the environmental impact has been localised to the extent that it can be dealt with at minimum cost. Now we'll be back right after this break. Welcome back. The second problem facing the Queensland Government as a result of the influx of residents and tourists is potentially far more serious. Southern Queensland is blessed with a chain of unique, environmentally fragile sand islands. They include South and North Stradbroke, Moreton, Bribie and Fraser. The Broadwater, stretching from Southport to Moreton Bay between South and North Stradbroke and the mainland, is the delta of several rivers and represents a vast tract of mangrove islands, channels, mud and sand banks and wetlands which provide a fish and wildlife habitat second to none. There are 10 main islands, some of which are inhabited, and a network of waterways which carry heavy pleasure and commercial traffic. Most of these islands are popular destinations with boaties and tourists, and all have suffered some impact as a result, but by far the most vulnerable is South Stradbroke. This is almost within swimming distance of Surfers Paradise and is the destination for thousands of boats of all sizes each week. The proximity of the island has caused it to suffer many depredations over the years. In the early days of settlement of the Gold Coast, it was the centre of oyster farming. In fact, the township at Kurrajee was larger than Southport at one stage. Oyster farming has continued, with several leases being worked today and at least one processing plant on the island. At one time, the golden wallaby was in competition with a large herd of wild cattle. These were removed from the island less than 20 years ago. South Stradbroke wasn't always an island. In 1894, the freighter Canvas Wallace sank off the island. She was loaded with beer, whiskey and explosives, and a path was beaten across the island to salvage the grog. When it was all unloaded, the explosives were detonated, and the resultant damage, in combination with that done by the salvagers, caused the breach which became Jumping Pin and separated the islands. This is one of the earliest documented examples of the fragility of the Great Sandy Area and of the results of carelessness. Its implications have been far-reaching indeed. Until the opening of Jumping Pin, all the outfall from the Nerang, Coomera and Logan rivers and numerous smaller rivers and streams went through the Southport Bar, and consequently it was a deep water entrance. The Pin now attracts the bulk of that outfall, and the southern end of the Broadwater has silted up to the extent that it requires constant dredging. This in turn resulted in the necessity to construct the Southport Seaway. The island's 21 kilometres long and 2.5 kilometres at its widest point. There are two settlements, one at the old town of Kurrajee and the other at Tippler's Resort, which forms the main destination for many of the Gold Coast cruise boats on a day trip basis. Tippler's Resort also features a series of overnight resort-type bourrées for people who wish to stay on the island. The rest of the island's a wilderness with frontal dunes stabilised in most places by casuarinas and grass, scrub in the interior and tea tree and mangrove swamps. At Conroy, there's a stand of palms, startling in their contrast to the rest of the vegetation. The northern end of the island, known as the bedrooms, is in constant change. Jump and pin moves, leaving vast arid sand flats which resist stabilisation, although there are signs of mangrove and marine couch consolidation in some areas. The island's home to a vast variety of birds. On the beaches are waders, including the pied oyster catcher. Ospreys and fish eagles soar the frontal dunes, and crested pigeons vie with lorikeets for pickings. Habitation on the island has had a positive effect on the wildlife. The unique golden Stradbroke wallaby, of which there are an estimated 3,000 on the island, supplements its diet with kitchen scraps and is also husbanded by the rangers and residents. This helps the colony through arid times and ensures the continuation of the species. During droughts in the west, pelicans come here to live and breed, and the mangrove swamps do their part in conducting nutrients through the food chain and breeding fish and crabs. South Stradbroke shares another phenomenon with Queensland's Sand Islands, although on a smaller scale. That is the miracle of the presence of freshwater lakes in sand. This small lake, just inside the frontal dunes opposite Conroy, supplements the water supplied by the residents and helps in the survival of the wallabies. It was formed in the classic way. Vegetation blown into a depression in the sand was consolidated by rain into peat. This seals the sand, forming a bowl, and the rainwater is collected to form the lake. In common with all of Queensland's unique sand islands, the island's dynamic and unstable in its form. A minor break in the foreshore vegetation combined with a stable weather pattern leading to southeasters will form a sand blow in an astonishingly short time. The sand breaches the foreshore dunes and moves into the interior, being constantly fed with sand from the beach. There are currently several along the eastern beach, and this one is rapidly burying a stand of casuarinas. You can see the top branches still alive, protruding from the sand. Steps are being taken to encourage foreshore growth. This stabilises the beach end of the blow and starves it of sand. The blow then becomes a stable dune with grass and trees rapidly taking hold. At one stage, the island was almost one big sand blow, the result of uncontrolled usage and lack of care by the people who worked and visited it. Then in 1974, the Queensland Government brought down a master plan for the conservation and management of the area from Jump and Pin to the Southport Bridge. In 1979, Ivan Gibbs became State Minister for National Parks, and the plan was given direction due to Ivan's personal involvement in the southern Moreton Bay region. As a result, the last 10 years have seen the island stabilised. Many of the original flora species have been re-established, and facilities have been provided for camping and general enjoyment. Unfortunately, utilisation has grown to the extent that these facilities are now inadequate, and rather than make stopgap changes, it was decided to adopt a master plan which would involve a buyback of vast tracts of the island for return to the public domain and the establishment of destination facilities which would confine intensive recreational usage to only 6% of the island's area. Now we'll be back right after this break to go fishing on Fraser Island with Nev Howard. Welcome back. When we first planned this trip to Fraser Island, I gave Neville Howard the job of organising all the fishing gear. And the one stipulation I made was that the gear be Australian in design and or origin. Now he said he couldn't quite do that, but he could make it Australasian. So I said that I would settle for Australasian. Neville, there's an awful lot of fishing gear comes in from Japan and other countries, isn't there?
Oh yeah, too much.
You reckon there's too much?
Too much, yes.
Well,
look out, you've got it on your feet.
That doesn't matter. Yes, the tide's coming in here, we're getting our feet cooled down.
Really too much comes in from Southeast Asia and Japan, where it is done in this country. We can do it just as well.
Well, you had no trouble giving us all Australasian gear for this trip, did you?
Yes.
And it's certainly all top quality.
Yes. It's the only stuff I'll use anyhow.
Right, now you said that you couldn't give me Australian rods, but you could give me Australasian. In other words, blanks which are made in New Zealand, but the rods are actually built here in Brisbane.
Yes.
And they're built by Wilson's?
That's my word. Yes.
Now, they're most eye-catching. They have a black, obviously carbon reinforced shaft there, turning to pink at the tip. Now that certainly is an advantage for visibility, but also gives you quite a nice styling advantage too. They're really good looking rods, aren't they?
Well, you can do without the style when you're fishing, because I
you've
don't avoid the colour.
You've got a bit of style when you're fishing, Neville.
But let me say this, that when they started building this rod, they realised that they had to have a very, very strong rod for our conditions in the surf.
Now, why do our conditions demand a strong rod?
Well, you're throwing into the wind 90% of the time,
right,
and you're carrying a lot of lead on that line.
So you're putting a lot of stress on the rod.
You're putting a lot of strain on it.
And we also catch big fish, you've got to say that too.
Very well, yes. Now, to do that, what they did was, they strengthened up the first part of the rod, the part down here that's got to be real strong.
With carbon fibre.
With the carbon, they put the carbon in. And when they got up the top there, they turned to their glasses there, but they changed it and put runners on it so that you can actually see them at night time.
Right.
So that you can know where the tip of that rod is at all times. It gives the added advantage being built up like that, that you've got that whippy top, so that, like I said, when you're casting, you can get that bumpo at the top like that, and that's the whole idea of it.
Right. And
he's done a very good job of it, I might add.
Yeah, because the technology of making rod blanks is really extremely high tech.
Yes.
These are made on a mandrel.
Yes.
And they're made by processes which in some cases are secret.
Yes, that's right.
And remain certainly in camera and in-house as far as individual manufacturers are concerned. Right. When I was in the glass game in Sydney, I became very interested in making flagpoles.
Yes.
Now, flagpoles are made on a much larger scale, but in a very similar way to this. They're spirally wound around a mandrel, but in the case of fishing rods, they are designing degrees of flexibility along the length of the rod, which mean that they have to lay longitudinal strands of reinforcing and then consolidate that spirally and do it in an extremely controlled and scientific way. And I have great admiration for people who are able to not only make the things, but make thousands of them that are effectively exactly the same within, say, 1/4 of an ounce at any part of the rod as far as flex effort is concerned.
Yes, right.
Quite remarkable.
Now, you must mind it again, there we go. You've got to be conscious the whole time at how much lead you're throwing.
Right.
To choose a rod, you must know just how much lead you're going to throw in the very first going.
Right.
And it's from there that you look for a rod that is built up to the way it suits you.
Okay,
and there are so many rods that Wilson makes that this can be done with.
So if you're starting out, you go to your friendly fishing shop, Nev Howard say.
Right.
You tell him what you want to do and he will recommend the rod for you. He'll tell you what rod to buy and is suitable.
As a matter of fact, too many people, and I'm not knocking when I say this, Chris, I'm not knocking the likes of your big, what they call department stores, etc. I'm not knocking them one little bit. What I am saying is, if you don't know what you want, then you go to your friendly tackle man, because he can tell you.
Yeah, he's the
so
fisherman.
many people come into my shop that could fish me round and round in circles. I wouldn't catch a fish where these fellas catch them, and yet they come to me for advice.
Yeah.
Now they can't do that at the department stores.
At the department store, and that is the difference.
That is the big difference. Yes.
As a matter of fact, just on that point, I fondly remember the time when I was a kid and I used to go to the local grocery store and buy 3 penn'orth of broken biscuits from him.
Yes.
Try doing that today.
Yeah.
And try asking the grocery store man the qualities and properties of whatever that you want to buy out of the grocery store. All I know is the price, and that's the end of it.
That's right, yes.
And I mourn that era. I really do. I think that the personalised aspects of shopping have just disappeared.
Yes.
And it's a shame to see them go.
It has, but we in our shop have never ever let that go.
Well, I was just going to say, the fishing tackle stores, among very few others, but particularly the fishing tackle stores, have retained that personal approach to their customers.
Yep. And this is what the likes of Wilson prey on too, of course.
Well, Wilson asked you what your customers want, and then he makes the product.
Yes, he turns around and he said to me, he said, "Neville, what is wrong with that rod?" I said, "It's no damn good for this spoon." Okay. So he said, "Well, what is it?" So you turn around and you tell him, and he'll turn around and come back and say, "What do you think of that, Neville?"
Yeah, try that one.
Yeah.
And that's the way to get product.
He not only makes fishing rods, he's quite a big importer in his own right with fishing gear and this kind of thing. Yeah. He's got something like 11 or 12 automatics all going.
Right.
Building fishing gear.
Right.
Yeah. And he always he makes lures.
Yeah.
Anything for the fishing is made up in his store in Brisbane.
Well, it's nice to see, and once again I get back to my original point. It was nice to come to one of the most Australian places in Australia, one of the most unspoiled places in Australia, and be able to catch Australian fish with Australians using Australian fishing gear.
Yeah. You can't do that these days, can you?
You certainly can't. All right, well listen, in the next couple of weeks we'll wait for the weather to die down a bit and get out there on the reef, on the banks out there, and see how we go with some bottom fishing again, using Australian gear.
Yes,
we'll see you when that happens.
Will do.
Okay, we'll be back right after this break. We're right out of time. That wraps us for another week. We'll see you next week with another show. In the meantime, take care and safe boating. Queensland Government initiative, and which it seems to me has the elements of success as far as compromising all of the requirements are concerned. The fact is, the population is going to grow. People are going to move to areas such as Queensland, which are attractive to them for their lifestyles, for their quality of life. And what the Queensland Government has done is taken a little away, but given an awful lot back. They've returned an island which was about 95% privately owned to a public domain which effectively represents 94%, and they've used 6% of it as to polarise as the utilisation of that area, and the movement into the wilderness areas of the island will be controlled. So that seems to me to be an ideal compromise. Now, it's a beautiful place. It's accessible to virtually anybody. You don't even have to have a boat, as we've seen. You can get there on a ferry or on an excursion boat, and it certainly is worth visiting next time you visit the Gold Coast. We'll be back next week with another World of Boats. In the meantime, take care and safe boating.